Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. I am your host, Jimmy Smith, and welcome to another launch of an exciting series here on the wines of Oregon from the United States Pacific Northwest. We are here looking at this series, which is designed really twofold. For those of you, firstly, that are studying the world of wine, this is aimed at those of you at the diploma level of WSET to give you the enjoyability, the confidence, and the understanding to really take this region to town and really do well in your examinations. But also, secondly, for those of you just want to know more about this really wonderful state and its contribution to the world of wine. I also would be very keen to hear about your experiences with Oregon as a state or Oregon wines. Let me know if you've visited places like McMinnville or Portland or the Dundee Hills. So we're going to look at a multi-part series of Oregon. So Oregon will be split into 4 series. You'll see them all here. This first series is on the introduction to Oregon, and it is split into a 7-part series. This video is going to be on the introduction and the history of Oregon. Part 2 will be on climate. Both of these parts are available as free content here on the world of YouTube, but parts 3 all the way to 7 are only available on my e-learning portal. You'll see that at the bottom of the slide. That's winewithjimmy.com, a really useful resource portal. I am going to get rocking and rolling now. Let's have a look at the world of Oregon. First of all, we're going to talk about its location in the world. Now, I just previously mentioned that this is located in the United States of America's Pacific Northwest. So it lies on the Pacific, sandwiched between Washington State in the north and California in its south. It's actually latitudinal between 42 and 46 north, which puts it on par really with sort of southern to central France. But of course, climatically, there are big differences here because you have the effect of the Pacific and the Alaskan current in comparison to, say, the Atlantic and the Gulf Stream, which affects parts of France, for example. Oregon produces about 1% of all the fine wine in the United States of America. It's a small wine state, but nonetheless very important. 70% of Oregon wineries produce fewer than 5,000 cases per year. And there's somewhere around 85% of producers being individually owned. It holds 23 AVAs as of 2022. So we are going to go through them in great detail when we go through series 2 through to 4. Now, just some facts and figures for you as of 2020. We are finding that, in fact, Oregon is expanding roughly by about 40 wineries per year, very significant amount. There's somewhere around 16,000 hectares planted to vine, very considerable. There's around 1,300 plus registered vineyards, 900 plus wineries, probably closer to 1,000 in 2022, with most of it being situated in the Willamette Valley. And of course, we have a domination of Pinot Noir across the state. About 6 out of 10, every 10 bottles is Pinot Noir. The number is much higher in the Willamette, and we'll get to looking at that a little bit later. One thing we're going to discuss, though, first of all, is Oregon's history, its living history, because it doesn't have an extensively long history. And in fact, its re-emergence in the wine stage is really from the 1960s and 70s. And some of these pioneers behind the wonderful emergence of Oregon wine are still alive today. And that is a beautiful thing to really get immersed in. If you visit, you can actually talk with some of these exceptionally knowledgeable, passionate pioneers behind this gorgeous and wonderful state. We're going to go back to the beginning, where we'll discuss, first of all, the first kind of records of viticulture in the state. We have a gentleman here, rather looking quite spiffing. This is Henderson Llewellyn. Now, in 1847, he was an Oregon Trail pioneer coming from, I believe, the east of the country. And he brought the first recorded plantings to Oregon from Ohio. Now, he had cuttings of orchard trees, of nut trees, and he brought some vines. Those vines were Isabella and Catawba, which are vinifera and labrusca hybrids, so not full-on vinifera at this time. He started his own vineyard, and he's also sold cuttings. Then, in 1859, we had a gentleman called Jean Mathieu. Now, he was a French immigrant from the eastern region of Savoie. He purchases a vineyard in Bouteville in the Willamette Valley, and he plants vinifera varieties like Meunier, Chasselas, Black Muscat, Gewürztraminer, and Riesling. These were the first recorded viniferas to be grown in Oregon. So this is from about the 1860s and 1870s. Then we have Peter Britt. In 1873, this Swiss immigrant plants Vitis vinifera varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Semillon, Zinfandel, Riesling, amongst others. He also establishes Valley View AVA in southern Oregon, which would become the Valley View AVA eventually, near the town of Jacksonville. This is viewed as the first commercial winery in Oregon in the first phase of Oregon wine making. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and we have wines being made from Riesling being grown at David's Hill in Forest Grove, which is, of course, now the Willamette Valley AVA. They were submitted and awarded medals at the 1904 St. Louis and Chicago World's Fair. So Oregon wine suddenly gained plaudits across the nation of the United States. But of course, this early first wave of winemaking comes to an end, as many does across the United States, because in 1916, Prohibition hits Oregon. It's enforced and it ends that first era of winemaking in the state. In 1933 and 34, Oregon's first post-Prohibition bonded winery was the Tualatin Winery, located in Hillsborough in the Willamette Valley. John Wood and then Ron Honeyman of Salem were among the group of early entrepreneurs who received bonded winery status shortly after the Repeal Act. So we have the emergence of the early wineries in the 33 and 34 era. Then we come to the middle of the 20th century. In 1961, Richard Summer plants Pinot Noir, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Chardonnay, Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel at his Hillcrest Vineyard in the Umpqua Valley. That's in the southern Oregon area. He launches really pretty much Oregon's modern winemaking phase. In 1967, he would then go on to make the first Pinot Noir, producing 6,000 gallons of Pinot Noir. So very important moment in time, but remembering that this is in the southern Oregon section. Then we come up to the Willamette Valley area. We have, of course, David Lett and Chuck Corey, or otherwise known as Charles Corey, his proper name, planted the first the post-Prohibition vineyards in the Willamette. First post-Prohibition. That's another tongue twister that my notes often do push upon me. David Lett establishes a nursery, whilst Charles Corey, fresh from the University of California, Davis, and a year in Alsace, plants the first of the vineyards from the nursery at by David Lett. They purchased the Forest Grove property, and that's one that operated since around the 1800s. Now, this moment in time is very important because this is really the founding part on the Lett side of things of the Eyrie Vineyards, which is today run by Jason Lett, and very importantly so, the son of David. So it's really starting these pioneers really of this modern era of Oregon winemaking. And that leads me on to another important pioneer. In 1973, David Lett and another David, that's David Adelsheim, second from the right on this picture, standing next to yours truly. They both create maps to designate the key wine areas of the Willamette. This is the first cartography of the area. They lobbied to protect this land, and it was ratified in the Senate Bill 100. This is me meeting David Adelsheim in 2022, really at the estate, which is making some absolutely exquisite Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs to this day. Also, David Adelsheim has been exceptionally important in terms of understanding the geology and mapping out the areas and creating more of the nestled AVAs within the Willamette Valley. Very important work being done by a very charming and very important man. In 1977, labeling regulations come into play. Oregon winemakers join together and they enact the strictest labeling laws in the United States, which we still have today. That will be actually touched upon later on in this series. Then some real international acclaim. We have very much an important tasting. So in 1979, the 1975 edition of the Eyrie Vineyard South Block Reserve Pinot Noir was placed in the top 10 of Burgundy's finest Burgundies in a blind tasting, suddenly turning people's heads to Oregon, of course, and starting to get this worldwide international acclaim, really gaining momentum. And of course, this started to translate into the area after that work done by the two Davids of Lett and Adelsheim. In 1983, the Willamette Valley becomes the first Oregon AVA. In 1984, South Oregon joins, and Columbia and Walla Walla AVAs as well in the same year. So just a few in 1983, and now in 2023, 22 rather, we have 23 AVAs in play. And of course, all of this this acclaim was turning the heads of the world. And of course, certainly when you're pitching these wines against Burgundy and they're holding their own against the best of Burgundy, of course, Burgundian negotiants and merchants start to take note of Oregon. And in 1987 to 1988, we have the arrival of the Europeans. We have Robert Drohan, who owns Domaine Drohan in Burgundy, comes across here, purchases a sizable amount of land in the Dundee Hills, and of course, he crafts eventually his first wine with Veronique Drohan. And that is in the late 1980s, and many French have followed suit, most recently, of course, the fame of Resonance by, of course, Maison Louis Jadot. So lots of attention here. Many Burgundians believing that the Willamette Valley specifically of Oregon is some of the best Pinot Noir outside of Burgundy. How exciting is that when all of this foreign investment from France is flooding into your region with this wonderful, wonderful recognition. And that takes us up to today. We have a number of great wineries that are increasing every year, lots of different philosophies across lots of the AVAs, and some beautiful, very Burgundian examples being produced from Oregon. I have been here and I'm very excited about the wines that come out of Oregon. Every time I'm able to get my hands on some, I do snap them up. Excellent examples to be found. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the historical part of Oregon. Please join me next for the climate of Oregon. We'll talk about, of course, rainfall. We'll talk about sunlight in terms of its latitudinal effects. We'll talk about, of course, the effect of the Alaska current that comes down the Pacific. Lots of things to discuss here, what makes this place quite unique and gives it its lovely rolling green hills, which actually are not too far amiss from the United Kingdom in terms of what it looks like. So please do join me for that. Any comments, questions or concerns, or if you just want to let us know about your experiences in Oregon or with Oregon wines, please pop them in the comments section below this video. Make sure you click like and make sure you click subscribe. They both help me and they help you. That's me finished. If you do find yourself in the beautiful rolling hills of Old Blighty here in the United Kingdom, then please come and say hi. Maybe for a class, maybe for a glass, but most likely for a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Goodbye.